The Vice Presidency of the United States is an often thankless job, but what if the President is having a colonoscopy? Sometimes there are moments when we realize just how essential the VP actually is. The Vice President is the presiding officer in charge of the federal Senate, though they don't get to vote on any bills or legislation, except in the event of a tie. In addition to breaking ties in the Senate, the Vice President is also there to prevent a power vacuum and continue the government with limited interruption should the President ever become indisposed. These possibilities include death, conviction after impeachment, resignation, or removal by the presidential cabinet. One of these occasions happened in April 1841, when President William Henry Harrison died just 32 days into his term, which elevated VP John Tyler to the highest office. Other examples of VPs taking over for deceased presidents include Millard Fillmore for Zachary Taylor, Chester A. Arthur for James Garfield, Teddy Roosevelt for William McKinley, Calvin Coolidge for Warren Harding, Harry Truman for Franklin Roosevelt, and Lyndon Johnson for John F. Kennedy. And Gerald Ford also ascended to the highest office in 1974, following the resignation of Richard Nixon.
This is an hour of history that troubles our minds and hurts our hearts.
Under the Electoral College system, ballots are cast for a slate of electors affiliated with major candidates' parties. Whichever candidate wins the popular vote in each state receives a certain number of electors tied to the population count. Those electors tally their results and send them to Congress for certification and to be officially counted. This is where the Vice President, as the President of the Senate, springs into action. It's a largely ceremonial duty, but the VP nonetheless opens the certificates from the state Electoral College meetings and counts them in front of Congress. This all happens on January 6th, following the elections in November.
This duty is a sacred obligation.
In contemporary times, the President and Vice President run as a united front. But back in the early years of the United States, the Vice Presidency was a consolation prize, as the candidate who finished second in the presidential race got the job. Then in 1804, the 12th Amendment was added to the Constitution, which established the practice of a two-person ticket taking both the presidency and the vice presidency. Because the Vice President assumes the office of the presidency if the President ever becomes incapacitated, VP candidates must meet the same basic requirements as the President. Thus, according to the Qualifications Clause of the Constitution, the VP must be 35 or older, a natural-born citizen of the United States, and have lived in the country for the past 14 years or more. The Vice President must be accessible to the President and other high-ranking government officials, which is why they live and work close to the White House. While the VPs keep offices at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, they actually reside with their families a few miles away in a large mansion on the grounds of the United States Naval Observatory. Built in 1893, No. 1 Observatory Circle was initially constructed as a residence for the head of the Naval Observatory. The 9,000-square-foot, 33-room building became the official vice presidential home in 1974. Gerald Ford was VP at the time, but he quickly ascended to the presidency upon Richard Nixon's resignation, so he never moved in. His own vice president, Nelson Rockefeller, used the structure to entertain guests but never lived there. So the first vice president to actually live there was Jimmy Carter's VP, Walter Mondale. Every vice president since then, including Kamala Harris, has called the mansion home. As an office and a political tool, the Vice Presidency is essentially whatever the current VP wishes to make of it. While they have only a few legally required and constitutionally mandated responsibilities, they also have plenty of time, connections, and clout to serve as something between an advisor and a lieutenant to the President. Some vice presidents may act as a senior member of the President's team, helping to propose or draft bills or strategies, and then talk those up to members of Congress. For example, Jimmy Carter and his VP, Walter Mondale, consulted weekly on policy. Other vice presidents have taken the lead on certain aspects of governing that fit their experience. Al Gore, for one, advocated for environmental protection and the development of new technologies while serving under President Bill Clinton. Lyndon Johnson, meanwhile, talked up John F. Kennedy's assertive civil rights programs. Vice presidents are occasionally called upon to represent the office of the presidency. When presidents are unable, unwilling, or uninterested in attending events in an official state capacity, the VP can do so on their behalf. Kamala Harris, for one, notably attended nearly 1,000 events in her first 649 days in office as VP. A handful of vice presidents have been tasked into the position of acting president. According to the 25th Amendment, whenever the president is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office, and until he transmits to them a written declaration to the contrary, such powers and duties shall be discharged by the vice president as acting president. 3 commanders-in-chief utilized this law, as George H.W. Bush, Dick Cheney, and Harris all served as president while their bosses were under anesthesia for medical procedures.